The electorate is changing. Here's what that means for Trump and Harris. There's a reason Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are intensifying efforts to reach beyond their party's traditional supporters in the final weeks of this razor-thin campaign, extending a pattern that stretches back decades. White voters without a college degree, the cornerstone of the modern GOP coalition, have declined by a little more than 2 percentage points as a share of eligible voters since 2020, falling below 40% of the eligible voting pool for the first time ever, according to a new analysis of the latest Census Bureau data by demographer William Frey, shared exclusively with CNN. While those working-class whites are shrinking, Frey found that both whites with at least a 4-year college degree and voters of color have each increased since 2020 by about a single percentage point as a share of eligible voters. Those increases also continue long-term trends that have seen whites grow to represent more than 1 inch -4 eligible voters, and people of color rise past 1 and 3. These trends help explain why the former president has devoted so much effort to reaching beyond his traditional base of white voters, without a college education, to attract more Black and Latino voters, especially men. And, in turn, the trends help explain the emphasis the vice president is placing on attracting more college-educated white voters who have previously leaned toward the GOP, a priority she underscored by barnstorming across populist white-collar suburbs outside Philadelphia, Detroit and Milwaukee with GOP former Representative Liz Cheney on Monday. The impact of these incremental shifts in the composition of the major voter groups can easily be outweighed by changes in the preferences of those groups. Trump, for instance, is counting on gains among Latino voters, especially men, to neutralize the anticipated benefits for Democrats as Latinos increase their share of the vote, particularly in closely contested Arizona and Nevada. But the cumulative impact of these shifts in the electorate's basic composition is undeniable. Trump, for instance, in each of his 2 presidential campaigns, won nearly as big a share of white voters without a college education as Ronald Reagan did in 1984, according to exit polls. Yet because those working-class whites had fallen from about 2/3 of voters in 1984 to around 2/5 now, Trump only won about 47% of the total vote in each of his 2 campaigns, while Reagan captured nearly 59%. Even this year, in a race so close, small shifts in the electorate's composition across the most competitive states could make a difference. For instance, the fact that non-college whites, according to Frey's analysis, have fallen as a share of the eligible electorate since 2020 considerably more in Michigan and Wisconsin than in Pennsylvania, may help explain why most analysts consider the Keystone State more difficult than the other 2 for Harris. Shifts in racial and educational levels are not the only important changes. Frey, a senior fellow at the nonpartisan Brookings Metro think tank, has tracked in the makeup of eligible voters between 2020 and 2024. He also found that women will comprise nearly 52% of all eligible voters, which should help Harris. But his analysis shows that number actually represents a very small shift in the eligible electorate since 2020, toward men, which at the margin might benefit Trump. Frey also finds that Generation Z will make a big jump in their share of eligible voters, from about 1 in 10 last time to more than 1 in 6 this year. That increase underscores the stakes in Harris' attempts to max out her support among younger women and Trump's determined attempts to court young men. Frey's analysis finds that the white voters without a college degree are declining as a share of eligible voters, not only in the nation overall, but specifically across almost all of the 7 battleground states. North Carolina is the sole swing state where he found that they had increased as a portion of eligible voters since 2020. That decline is rooted in an ongoing process of generational replacement. Compared to younger generations, America's older cohorts are much more heavily white and also much less likely to hold at least a 4-year college degree. As those older whites age out of the electorate, and more diverse and better educated generations grow into it, the composition of the eligible voter pool inexorably transforms. Whites are a shrinking part of the population, and a part of that population which is shrinking even more are the people who don't have college education, said Frey. While these blue-collar whites are receding in both the Rust Belt and Sun Belt Different kinds of voters are replacing them across the two regions, Frey found. These blue-collar whites represent a much larger share of the total electorate in the Rust Belt than the Sun Belt. Frey found that in 2020, they comprised around half of eligible voters in both Michigan and Pennsylvania, and nearly 3/5 in Wisconsin. But Frey found that since 2020, they have declined more rapidly than almost anywhere else in Michigan, falling by nearly 3 percentage points, and Wisconsin dropping by more than 3 percentage points. In Michigan, he found a slight increase in minority voters among the eligible voter pool, while in Wisconsin those non-white voters, who were already a smaller share of eligibles than in the other Rust Belt battlegrounds, actually declined even further. In both states, the big gainers since 2020 are whites with at least a 4-year college degree. Frey found they increased more than 2 percentage points as a share of eligible voters in Michigan and over 4 points in Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania, the shift isn't as dramatic. Frey found that the non-college white share of eligible voters dropped since 2020 by about 1.5 percentage points, about half as much as in the other two former Blue Wall states. A small increase in the minority population made up most of that difference, with college-educated whites increasing only very slightly. Across the Sun Belt battlegrounds, blue-collar whites are a smaller share of the eligible voters, about 1 in 3 in Arizona, Georgia and Nevada, and just over 2 in 5 in North Carolina. Arizona and Georgia saw big increases since 2020 in the minority share of their eligible voter population. Frey found, while non-whites actually declined somewhat in North Carolina and remained almost unchanged in Nevada, college-educated whites increased as a portion of eligible voters in Nevada and Arizona, while falling slightly in Georgia and essentially holding steady in North Carolina.